Welcome back to the Meantime Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast. So one of the hosts thinks the higher the stuff rate, the more likely he is to tear you apart. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes. I am joined on this fine free agency week by the one, the only Dan Pizzuta of the 33rd team. Dan has been ranking free agents. He has been grading free agents. He is ready to talk about some of the biggest signings, when this hits your ears, free agency will have officially begun. It has been, we were talking about this before we started, perhaps one of the most active legal tampering periods, meaning the couple days before free agency when free agents can legally talk to teams for the first time. Dan, that I can remember.
Yeah, absolutely. When we were thinking about doing this, I was like, okay, if we do it before free agency opens, we might be doing like kind of a preview, talking about some rumors. No, everyone signed. I think I did a top 100 for the 33rd team, kind of previewing free agency. I think as we're talking right now, there's 44 guys left. Wow. And those are most of the bottom guys. And that was also with a couple of guys that got added and released. So it was really more like a 106-ish eventually. But everybody's gone. So we got a lot to talk about.
And I appreciate it because the Kirk Cousins he didn't hold the quarterback carousel hostage, but all for weeks it was, we got to wait to see what Kirk Cousins signs because then that'll unlock everything else. And he did sign. He signed with the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the quarterback signings that happened, that haven't happened, some of the trades. We're going to grade a bunch of, we threw a bunch of signings at you and that I found most intriguing. We're going to grade those at the end. But before we get to those and before we get to some of our favorites and some of the biggest deals, I wanted to start off by talking about the extremely active running back market. From the jump, soon as free agency or legal tampering started, running backs started flying off the shelves. And what was fascinating about it, Dan, is outside of a couple deals that came in early, DeAndre Swift and Saquon Barkley, which we'll talk about, for the most part, the contracts are very affordable. Looking at all of them, most of them are actually one-year deals or they're like low single-digit millions. So the fact that there were so many running backs available seems to have kept their value down along with, all the various forces that have done so in recent years. However, it didn't stop teams from moving quickly to get the players they want with a bunch of players switching teams, which I think is fascinating. And it probably reflects how the league views the draft to some extent, the fact that it is not a very strong running back class by consensus. But the level of movement is really interesting. And before we get into the individual contracts, I wonder what you made of that.
Yeah, that was one of the more interesting things where we saw all of the movement and how early it was, where there wasn't a lot of teams kind of waiting, and maybe they could have, right? After kind of the flurry we eventually saw Joe Mixon traded for a 7th round pick, saw Aaron Jones released and then signed for 1 year, $6 million. So we'll get to like some of the other deals that were signed a little earlier. So it kind of still seems like if teams had waited, there were still some of those, deals to have. And Austin Eckler also, like if you did wait, there were some of those deals to be had. But it is interesting that, we saw most of these guys got franchised last year. And they were kind of upset with that, wanted a little more. Most of them got like a reworked deal to give them a little more of a bonus. And then they all kind of disappointed in their 1 years. But that didn't seem to completely tank their market, which I think some people were expecting. Like, it wasn't a big raise in what we saw from the running back market. Like last year, we saw the Jonathan Taylor extension, $14 million a year for 3 years. We didn't get any raise on that at all. And Barkley, the most expensive one, came in, still significantly below that. So it is interesting that there is a lot of movement, not a huge bump in what running backs are, but I think we still saw teams wanting to get their guys and get someone in there so they didn't have to rely on, hoping for some of the last bits of free agency or the draft.
Yeah, that Taylor deal looks like quite the premium now when you see some of these other contracts that have gotten signed, including the one given by the Bengals to his sort of substitute, Zach Moss, who actually ran quite well for Indianapolis. It's one of the deals that I did like for the value. But let's start with the last one to drop, one that certainly has been fantasized about for a while by people who like running back play. Derrick Henry signing with the Baltimore Ravens, 2 years, $16 million, $9 guaranteed. So it's a $9 million deal, to our point. So I'm of two minds of this, but we should start with, I think, by discussing kind of who Derrick Henry is as a player now. Do you think he is a player where the reputation outweighs the production at this, at his age, at this point in his career? Or do you think he is still as powerful and effective as a runner as he's been and can bring positive change to this Ravens offense?
It's probably somewhere in between, to give the worst answer to that question. But when you look at what he had to do last year, and he's, running back, it's going to be, approaching 30 now, like into a time when we think a lot of these types of backs are going to decline. But we've been saying that about Derrick Henry for the past, 4 years now, and it just kind of never really happens. And when you look at what he had to do in 2023, almost half of his runs were into boxes of 8 or more, 0.85 yards before contact per rush. That was one of the lowest in the league. So his degree of difficulty last year was so high, and it's going to be much easier. Hypothetically, I think theoretically, we're hoping with Baltimore. So if you put him there, he's not going to be a guy who has to carry the ball 300 times in this offense. Hopefully, you have a rotation of backs there in Baltimore that can help a little bit. So I think with the offensive scheme, the offensive line, putting him with Lamar Jackson, I think this is kind of the perfect fit of where Derrick Henry can be kind of at his best. And it's probably exactly what you want for this type of back, hoping to do some things around him to stave off, some of that regression and the age decline that it's eventually going to happen. But I'll keep betting on him until I actually see it at this point.
It's an awesome landing spot for Henry. You talked about all the stacked boxes he ran into in Tennessee. Sometimes too, they would just run him and you'd be like, why are we doing this, Tennessee? So Baltimore, during Lamar Jackson's career has certainly faced their fair share of stacked boxes. But last year, you actually saw those numbers take a pretty significant dip, going from 20.6% in 2022 down to 13.4%, which is a pretty big drop as teams had to respect the weapons that they had on the perimeter, Zay Flowers and Odell Beckham Jr. and Rashad Bateman in that offense, with Todd Monken calling the shots. They also ran into too high shells at the highest rate in the league. So if you played too high, trying to stop the pass game, they were willing to run the ball. A lot of that is Lamar too. I love all of this for Henry. And if defenses, historically defenses have played very heavy boxes against him, if they do decide to do that, they'll punish them for it. And they have the ability to do so. I love the pairing with Keaton Mitchell. I joke this is like the most Thunder and Lightning. It's like the prototype of a Thunder and Lightning pairing, but like it really is a nice duo. And I think as we talk about the movement and why it's happening and why teams have transitioned from one player to another, fit is really something that jumps out to me. You really, I think, have to look at when you consider these signings and you consider teams run games, you have to look at the group, because I think that's how teams are thinking about it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, one of the things, like you mentioned Mitchell, kind of hope he comes back healthy from his injury that happened late in the season. But you look at it, like Derrick Henry for so long, like just was the guy leading with, so many carries. He was putting over like 350 carries in some of those Tennessee seasons. And that's just not going to be what's asked of him anymore, which I think helps a lot. So you can rotate him in a little bit. You have Lamar as that, also a running threat in the backfield. You were talking about the lighter boxes that they're going to be running into. They play more of 11. I think the carries themselves will be less of a weight on Henry. Yeah. And if, you're playing lighter, he's still one of the best just broken tackle type of running backs. So yeah, this is just a thing where I think it takes the load off Henry. Henry's going to take the load off a lot of other things the Ravens want to do in that offense. So yeah, it's one of the most fun fits of these kind of running back and new team pairings that we've seen.
So we're doing grades just based on fit, value, player, all of it. I give this one an A-. Maybe that's a little bit generous. Maybe that is a vibes-based grade. I don't care. The vibes are immaculate. I mean, he's going to look so cool in the Ravens All Blacks. I can already see it. The minus for me is mostly because I actually really like Gus Edwards, who they moved on from, and I'm not even sure it's like that much of a significant upgrade, but the price is, they're not paying him a lot, honestly. And so for me, it's a pretty solid deal. Super solid.
Yeah, absolutely. I had it as a B because I'm just going to keep
expectations
tempered on a lot of, you're going to see this with a lot of these grades. A lot of them are going to hover around average, but yeah, it's B for a running back signing in this kind of just market and kind of overall how we view that position and what it means. A B is very good.
So I'm curious to see what you make of this next one. The Bengals were rumored to be cutting Joe Mixon, and then nope, he's actually being traded for a 7th rounder, which obviously has implications for things like comp picks and whatnot. And there's reasons why trades happen for very, very little in terms of draft assets. But what it means functionally is that Houston gets their back, which was a question mark. Devin Singletary left for the Giants at free agency. He is very affordable. It's like $6 million. So let's look at this from Houston's standpoint. I talked about the Bengals earlier in signing Zach Moss. Scheme wise, makes a ton of sense. Joe Mixon is, your classic zone running back. We saw that certainly through his first few years in Cincinnati, where they were more of a zone running scheme. We know that's what Bobby Slowick wants to do in Houston. He is not coming off of a particularly great season, but of course it was a season where, Joe Burrow wasn't the quarterback for much of the year. How do you like this from the Texans standpoint?
Yeah, I think this is one of the benefits of waiting out what that running back market was, because you're getting him on a very cheap deal, only gave up a 7th round pick. So kind of when you look at that and then you kind of look at what Houston was dealing with last year, it wasn't a great running back. They just weren't good at running the ball, especially on early downs. We kind of hope Bobby Slowick does not run on early downs quite as often as they did when heading into this year. And I think there was a little bit of, in the middle of the year, they kind of really figured out, CJ Stroud really good. So I think that's going to be more of an off-season thing that they figure out instead of doing a middle of the season kind of pivot, because I think that was more of the plan they had just going into the season. So with that, Mixon can be good, running out of shotgun is good. He can do some of that under center stuff, which the Bengals kind of always struggled to match with what they were doing with Joe Burrow in their kind of under center, in their shotgun type of, LSU Burrow offense. So I think this is a really good fit. Again, it doesn't take a lot it's not a big investment for Houston either. So again, this is like one of those where I think it a benefit to wait, and they got one of the cheaper deals on the market.
Yeah. I went A- on this too, for all the reasons that you outline. Value is huge. I think I'll be curious to see what happens with Dameon Pierce, who had a really rough season last year. And I think it was very obvious to me that he just wasn't a good fit for their offense. He's a guy actually I would love to see somewhere else, because they strike me as a team that should probably take a 2-track approach to the position, right? Like you bring in Mixon as the veteran, but you draft someone later in the draft who's a good scheme fit. Ultimately, where do you land?
I had this at a B-, which again is good for
no, it's good. You're bringing a little bit of moderation. I'm being too nice, probably. I'm actually going to go lower on the next signing that I want to talk about. Josh Jacobs to the Packers. Announces 4 years, $48 million. That is fake. It is $12.5 million guaranteed at signing. So that's important as we consider this, because it's really a 1-year deal. it's, not I think they were slated to pay Aaron Jones like just over $10 million, right? So 11 million, I think. So you're kind of one for one here when you actually look at the real dollars.
Right.
But it is that change that kind of perplexes me a little bit. Aaron Jones was great coming back from injury.
Yeah.
I normally, like, teams going younger and they're getting, that contract, if they do hold on to him, will probably age well. If he produces at a high level, it'll be affordable. Although, given that running back contracts don't seem to go up anymore, it's not like it's going to be a bargain in a couple of years. But, Jacobs, I think he's a good back. I think he was in, a difficult situation in Las Vegas last year. Obviously, the production dipped quite a bit from the year before when he had the rushing title. But Aaron Jones, I thought, was really outstanding when he came back from injury last season. And, when you dig into the advanced metrics, like his advanced metrics are better than Josh Jacobs were last year, like rushing yards over expected. He also, I guess my feeling, I know the Packers, Dan, are they're very young. And we're going to talk about one of their signings, which I really liked. So Packers fans, don't be apoplectic here. But I feel like if you're not really, maybe they know something about the players that makes them believe this is an upgrade. But if it's not a market upgrade, and if you're not saving money, do you really want to cut the locker room guy who's been there, who's the veteran, who's a leader on the team, forget the fact that he's really good at football. What he brings is a pass catcher. I just don't really understand this one. Did this confuse you as much as it confused me?
Yes. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. It didn't make a ton of sense to me. And I've kind of seen it somewhat justified as maybe Josh Jacobs turns into more of the AJ Dillon replacement.
Every down.
And they find someone else to be their Aaron Jones. But
you mean they view him more as a power back, Jacobs?
Yeah. So I don't either way, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Even if you look at the past 3 years, you kind of look at the EPA per rush. Josh Jacobs negative 0.8. Aaron Jones is about a flat 0, and that's with Josh Jacobs having a 27-8 rushing touchdown lead. So with that much touchdown value, still not being as good on a Aaron Jones has a higher success rate, has higher yards per rush, has a higher rate of runs of 10 or more yards. And again, there are different situations. But I think when you look at what Aaron Jones is and what he was able to do for that offense, I think he's one of those actual rare backs who his receiving ability and his ability to actually do things from the slot, either when they have two backs on the field or they're playing from empty, does make him a bit of a difference maker because it changes those looks. And Josh Jacobs is not that kind of back. He's probably a better receiver than we give him credit for, but a lot of it is, it's check downs and, stuff in the flats, and it's not really meaningful receiving work. So I don't see the benefit of, even if it is, a 1-to-1 swap just for this year. And I think with Jacobs a little bit, that 12.5 guaranteed is the signing bonus. So that does seep a little bit into year 2. So it's not quite as much of a 1-to-1 slot. So yeah, this was the most perplexing one to me. And again, even if this was only a 1-year deal for Jacobs, Aaron Jones only had 1 year. So if you're going to be looking for another running back again next year, why not just roll with the guy is good that you've had and then figure it out again next year? So this kind of felt like a move just to make one and get younger, just to kind of do it. And I'm not totally sure I buy what's going on.
Yeah, Josh Jacobs, 22nd out of 23 high volume backs in DVOA last season. Again, a fair amount of that had to do with the Raiders offense. And I think, I wouldn't be surprised if he comes in and looks good in Green Bay, because it's a fantastic situation for a running back, which is why, if they had gone value there, I would have said, okay, they view this as a position they don't have to invest in a lot because they have a really great run blocking offensive line, and then, they can spend it on their defense or maybe get another weapon. But to go premium-ish, I don't know. I didn't understand it. That's a C+ for me. Where are you coming?
Yeah, it was a C- for me.
Conversely, Aaron Jones, revenge signing with the Minnesota Vikings, 1 year, $7 million. I guess we don't have to get into Aaron Jones. We were just talking about how good he is. He goes from the Vikings. Well, they should be a good situation for a back because of what you have to do, the amount of too high that they face, the light boxes, that sort of thing. But we don't know who's playing quarterback. So it's currently Sam Darnold. We're going to talk about that. So we'll see. I really, I don't know what to make of the Vikings at the moment without knowing who is going to be under center. But as far as signings go, it's a good one. He's a good player. I think that, and I like, the pairing with Ty Chandler, who I thought showed some stuff last year. So again, I like those. I really like when teams go veteran and rookie together. So yeah, that to me, another A-.
Yeah, that was I did B+ again, but yeah, one for 6. I love the Kevin O'Connell offense, so I think they're going to use him in some of the ways that they did with Green Bay. Well, he'll move around a little bit. They can change some of those looks. Yeah, I like that fit a lot. Just would like it better if we knew what Minnesota was going to be. Yeah,
the offense has a lot of similar DNA. He's going to be asked to run outside zone a lot. I think that O'Connell will use him as a pass catcher too. So, I like it. All right. Saquon. This was the only really big deal. I guess that we'll get to Swift, but Saquon, 3 years. This was shocking to me. $37.75 million, 26 fully guaranteed. This is a real deal. This is real money coming in at just under 13 a year, not resetting the market, but that's healthy. It was shocking because it was the Philadelphia Eagles, who I think most of us were surprised. I mean, that's just not what their approach has not been to pay a premium for that position. I have kind of mixed feelings about this one. So, I've been talking about Saquon for a couple weeks and how I thought he was better last year than the basic numbers show. He was obviously in a very awful situation. And even with Jason Kelce retiring, this is honestly moving from, I'm trying to think of a place, I don't want to insult anyone, Antarctica to LA. It is great for a running back. I am a Saquon dynasty manager. I am thrilled personally. What a delight for me. Nate Tice, you're going down next year. I lost him in the finals. But I want to talk to you about why you think Philadelphia did this, because it's a philosophical change. And again, going back to teams like Green Bay, where they seem to be the team that any back can run well in. They finished 5th in rushing DVOA last year. Their offensive line was 1st in ESPN's run block win rate metric. So if the situation is fantastic for a running back and you're able to, anyone can come in and run the ball well, and Swift ran the ball well for them last year, why pay for Saquon? What do you think their thinking was?
So I think part of it was the jump in cap kind of makes this less detrimental than it would be in the past couple of years. And I think that's probably where it starts. Again, 12.6 is a lot for a running back, but again, it's not like they're paying him as a Christian McCaffrey or even a Jonathan Taylor. So I think that's part of it where they see there's maybe a little bit of surplus value in the sense of where the market could have been. And in terms of what their offense is going to be, if I'm going to talk about the positives of why they could think this, Barkley is kind of that explosive home run type hitter. And if there was something that DeAndre Swift left on the table last year, there was not a lot of explosive runs, right? He was very high in success rate. He kind of got what that offensive line gave him, but he had one of the lower rates of runs of 10 or more yards. And if you have that type of blocking up front and you're leaving yards on the table, like DeAndre Swift actually had negative yards above expectation from Next Gen Stats. So when you kind of look at what could have been had with a running back who kind of does have that explosive ability, he can hit those home runs. I think that helps in this offense, especially when you think of what Barkley is. His negatives are that he has a few too many negative runs, but you put him behind the Philadelphia offensive line, you're really eliminating the risk of a lot of those negative runs, as long as he is, hitting the hole he's supposed to. So if you look at last year, Philadelphia had a 14.2% stuff rate on running back runs. That was the second best in the league. The Giants were at 23.3%, which was 31st. Philadelphia on running back runs, 1.92 yards before contact per rush on running back runs, which was first. The Giants were under 1 at 0.88, which was 29th. So if you're getting Barkley some of those free yards to start, and then he can kind of have that home run ability, I think that's maybe what the Eagles are hoping for, because there was some stuff left on the table there. My hesitation is like what he brings as a pass catcher. I think is we've overrated it a little bit. I think if people are expecting a Christian McCaffrey type of transformation of what he brings, like, it's just, you're going to be disappointed. He has that a little bit, but when he's in the slot and out wide, a lot of it was screens. Now, Kellen Moore doesn't really run a lot of, screens to his running backs, even though he did get Pollard out a little bit back in those Dallas days. But I'm not sure if he's that type of transcendent pass catcher that's really going to evolve the offense. And you're going from an offense now where he's probably, the fourth best receiving option, as opposed to the Giants, where he probably, like, if you're taking away targets from Darius Slayton, like, fine. But if you're now going to take away targets from an AJ Brown or Devontae Smith or Dallas Goedert, you probably don't want to be doing that in that sense.
You don't, but I do think the appeal for him as a pass catcher, and you're right, he's not Christian McCaffrey, but the appeal is that because defenses last year played so much too high against Philadelphia, which was this massive sea change and really caused a lot of problems for the offense, it felt like they were sort of missing that yards after the catch element underneath. And now the perplexing thing was we've seen DeAndre Swift be that guy. He was that guy in Detroit. It felt more like a scheme issue than a player issue. So I'm not saying Barkley comes in and he's such a better pass catcher than DeAndre Swift. I don't think that's true. However, I can see why they wanted a running back who they could incorporate into the passing game, who they can use to hunt matchups. Although, to your point, you certainly don't want to take away from those two too much, or Goddard. I think also, like, one thing I did like the year before, when Daniel Jones really had his best year as a dual threat quarterback, you saw Barkley benefit from that as well. And so it is easy to imagine him re-unlocking Jalen Hurts in the zone read game, and hopefully he'll be healthy and the Eagles will go back to having such a dynamic quarterback run game. And I can see those two working together really well. So yeah, he's a really, really good player. I was high on him. I thought he was to me, he was the best option in free agency. He got paid like it. I think it's just the landing spot and the value are probably what bring this down to a B for me. But I wouldn't be surprised if, he could look awesome next year. And they obviously have a lot to fix on that offense. So.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what it is. So I'm somewhere between a B- and a C+ here. I felt like when I wrote a B-, it felt kind of high, still given the deal, but C+ felt too pessimistic. So I'm somewhere in between. If there was a B-, maybe, we'll go there.
All right, let's cruise through a couple more. Truly, every running back changed teams. It's wild. Tony Pollard with the Titans, 3 years, $24 million. I still haven't seen the guarantees on this, so I'm kind of reluctant to give it a grade. Have you seen them anywhere?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
This is the one where it's out there, so it's probably much less than that, I would guess, which again, it's fine. I think we saw he's not going to be a lead back in Dallas. Again, he was injured, so we didn't really get going until the last half of the season, but again, he's not the type of guy you want getting 20 carries a game. Him and it's interesting. It's fine. I had it as a C+ just because it's okay.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what this meant, really, because
the
type of player is not what anyone expected, mostly because his skill set seems a little bit duplicative with Tyjae Spears. Mm-hmm. in terms of being like a little bit lighter, a little bit closer to a scat back than a power back.
There's no thunder in that backfield.
This is So again, like I actually like the player, and I think he's probably underrated coming off of last season. Even last season too, he got so much criticism, and I think he deserves. He definitely, the volume hurt him, but when you look at the underlying numbers, like it wasn't a horrible run game in Dallas, and he wasn't awful. He finished 14th in DVOA, 9th in success rate, negative rushing yards over expected, which isn't great. But I do think he's a good player. But I'm also curious. We'll see what it means for. I mean, it's a new day in Tennessee. It's Brian Callahan. It's a new offense. They are not. To me, this suggests it is going to be more dramatically different from what we saw with Derrick Henry, where I alluded to this earlier. It felt like they're just banging their head into these 8-man boxes over and over. I don't think that's going to be the case in Tennessee. This feels like maybe it's going to be a little bit more spread it out, RPOs, attack through the air, quick passes, which, I think is probably going to be a good fit for Will Levis. So that's sort of my biggest read on this. They also invested in the offensive line, which is needed and smart.
Yeah, that offensive line was, I mean, we talked about it with Derrick Henry. It was probably easily the worst in the league last year.
And they're in such an interesting spot in the draft too, picking in the top 10, not being a team that's going to take a quarterback likely. They've been linked with a lot of the top 3 wide receivers like your Rome Odunze's, and suddenly you're like, okay, like let's say they get Rome Odunze. You got Hopkins, Burks, Odunze, Pollard, and Spears. Kind of spicy, but this deal, again, we can't really evaluate without the money. Assuming that the guarantees are less than like 10 or less, I guess I would probably give it like a B-.
Yeah. I think that's probably, this is the kind of thing where, again, we saw running back movement. How much of it, really is going to make a huge impact? I think these are all okay.
All right. The last one I wanted to talk about, I know there's more running back deals, is I kept alluding to this one. I feel bad because I like so much of what Chicago has done on defense. I praised them on defense all week. This DeAndre Swift deal, to me, was the most perplexing of maybe probably one of the 3 most confusing deals of free agency so far. Probably because it happened very quickly. It was like maybe the first deal to come through.
That was a big part of it. This was not one of the first deals you would have expected straight out of the gate.
Well, especially when you see the value that some of these other teams got. But 3 years, $24 million, and I was like, all right, well, maybe probably 1 year. It's 15 guaranteed, which good for Swift, but he's coming off this great year in Philadelphia. I don't know, like Philadelphia to me though, like why would you want a back, like not why would you want, but if you were a team, would you not be skeptical of a back having a great year behind the best run blocking offensive line in football after we just saw Miles Sanders leave Philadelphia and his production went off a cliff to the point where he was benched for Chuba Hubbard? Like what about that would make you think, oh great, yes, let's give him $15 million?
Yeah, and again, I think we can debate like whether it was really a great year. Again, he was 26th in the rate of runs of 10 or more yards behind the Eagles' offensive line. So again, while he did, what was there, he didn't add a lot. And that's kind of what is frustrating here because I like what the Bears already had at running back.
That
and
too.
What they did
yeah.
Last year on running back runs, they were 9th in EPA per play. They were 14th in rushes of 10 or more yards. And again, maybe you want like a little more explosion, but Swift wasn't that guy. Like wasn't that type of runner last year. So it is interesting. And again, I think this is kind of one of those that aged worse throughout the day. And as other, like if Chicago had waited, like could they have gotten Aaron Jones on that 1-6? I would love that for Shane Waldron and Caleb Williams and what the Bears are going to be doing. DeAndre Swift, I'm not totally sold on it.
Yeah, I guess they want a back who can catch passes to pair with Caleb Williams probably. And didn't feel like that, like Herbert could be that guy, Khalil Herbert. Roschon Johnson is more of your power back. I don't know. It didn't make sense to me, to be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, that will be a C for me. C is average, so maybe I definitely am inflating these grades. I'm gonna go C minus.
Okay, I was at C minus too. So.
I've been treating B as like average. So, all right. So, really quickly, other deals. I alluded to Zach Moss going to the Bengals. He was a guy who the advanced metrics really liked last year in Indianapolis.
Yeah, he played well.
Very cheap contract. Gus Edwards, another signing I really liked, going to reunite with G-Row with the Chargers. Again, another like the nerd numbers have loved him for a while. Just 2 years, $6.5 million, and his production is commensurate with a lot of these guys getting bigger deals. Devin Singletary to New York was 3 years, $16.5 million. We're still living in this like single-digit million range. I thought, he so obviously it's like much cheaper than Saquon. He was not fantastic in Houston, but he certainly distinguished himself as a lead back there and had a couple games where, especially towards the end of the season, where I was pretty impressed. So, that one's fine. And then Austin Eckler with Washington, again, very cheap, 2 years, up to $11 million. Fine. And I guess you pair him with Rodriguez,
yeah.
All these deals are fine. Like they're very affordable.
But again, like all deals I would rather have than DeAndre Swift at 324 and 14 guaranteed. So
okay. From a free agent signing to a trade, I want to talk at length about the big Brian Burns trade, which is one of the biggest moves in free agency. Then one of the biggest contract extensions after that. So the Giants, to acquire Burns' services, sent a second and a 5th round pick, second this year, 5th next year, to the Panthers. And they swapped 5ths. And then once he got in the building, they signed him to a $150 million contract, 5 years. Sorry, it's Lenny. $88 million guaranteed. So it comes in under Nick Bosa as far as edge rusher deals, but still obviously very large. So before we get to the Carolina of it all and just how unbelievably depressing this is for I Panthers fan, I don't even have cope for you. I actually, you know what? Panthers fans, I have a one cope angle. So
okay.
It's tough. It's tough to find one, but I have one cope angle. But put a pause to that. Let's talk about it from New York's standpoint. Because I don't think as we considered team needs and big moves that teams might make and where the holes were on these rosters or whatever. They were never talked about. At least I hadn't heard about them as a potential trade candidate for Burns. I don't think they were thought of as a team that was going to be really aggressive with any of the top of the market edge rushers either. Now it becomes really an unbelievable position of strength for them. You're looking at Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, one side, Kayvon Thibodeau on the other. How do you regard this? Like, do you like that they did this? Let's start there.
Yeah, I do. And I think it feels like what you have to do in order to get one of these guys, like one of these top edge rushers. I think we kind of look at what Chicago did at the trade deadline with Montez Sweat, right? Similar deal, kind of somewhat cheaper, getting him on a cheaper deal, but still sending a 2nd round pick just to kind of get one of those guys because they don't come on the market, right? We saw Josh Allen, he's going to get franchised. Brian Burns on like 31 other teams probably stays franchised and gets extended. So these guys just don't become available unless like you're picking high in the draft and you can kind of get one of these guys in. So in order to get Burns, you kind of have to make a trade like this. And for it to only be a second, and again, there's a 5th there, that's fine. Like I think a guy like this should probably be going for a 1st round pick. So the fact it was only a second, the Giants still have another second from trading Leonard Williams to the Seahawks. last year. So it doesn't even deplete the Giants in that way. Sorry. Factually speaking, the Giants still have
basically the same. They got the second and the fifth. They spent the second and the
Yeah. So you look at that, like Burns was 11th in pass rush win rate last year. His best seasons were kind of 21 and 22 with Phil Snow and how they kind of mix it up a little bit. I think those are more indicative of like what it'll be hopefully with, the Giants this year. But the Giants, we said they didn't really need the pass rush, but they were 29th in pressure rate last year, even though they had the second highest blitz rate. So they were not a team that was kind of winning with pressure often, even though, all the wink stuff was happening. It wasn't as impactful as it could have been. So now they can kind of line up with 4. They don't have to rely on that as often. So I think it takes some pressure off the rest of the defense too. And I think Burns is going to be a fun fit on that line.
Yeah. That's a big part of the reason why I like this so much for New York is that there's going to be a pretty massive change in identity on defense. You're going from Wink Martindale to Shane Bowen, who was the Titans defensive coordinator for the last few years. And during that period, since he was their defensive coordinator, 2021 through 2023, the Giants, unsurprisingly, first in the NFL in blitz rate, 37%, pardon me. The Titans only blitzed 19% of the time, which ranked 30th. I expected this new look Giants defense to be closer to that. So having an elite 4-man rush becomes much more important. I also just I like when teams say this, we're going to be really, really good at this. Like this is clearly the strength of the roster now. When you look at this roster, and there's still a lot of questions about that offense, including the quarterback position, skill player, they're probably going to invest in that draft, whatever. I feel good about this defensive line. Dexter Lawrence, second most double-teamed defensive tackle in the NFL last year. I'm not saying he's going to be double-teamed significantly less, but this is a stat that blew my mind. I was looking up pass rush win rate versus single teams. Unsurprisingly, 1, Micah Parsons. 2, Myles Garrett. Dexter Lawrence was 3rd. If you do not double team him, you are in absolute hell. So the opportunities that this will open up for those edge rushers is extraordinary. And I think it's to me, this is instantly going to be one of the better defensive lines in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Lawrence, it's, he's so unique in how often he was just lining up at straight nose over the center. So when it was one-on-one blocks, it was with a center who was probably much smaller than he was, because we kind of had that Jason Kelsey mold of center taking over. And then when he was double teams, you now have, a Thibodeau and Burns who can get those one-on-ones on the edge. So I'll be interested to see how that alignment does, change a little bit. And, they had some good interior players in Tennessee too. So I can imagine that continues to work. So yeah, I am pretty excited about what this is going to be. And it's just one of those, you have a chance to get a really good player, so go for it. And again, there are a lot of questions about the Giants and exactly kind of where they are in their whole, journey of what they're going to be and how they're going to contend. But I think you get Burns in this kind of deal is good. Getting good players, I'm going to be a plus for, even if it's not necessarily on the right exact part of a timeline. It's getting a player like that is never a bad idea.
Yeah, I ended up going A-. Just it's a lot. It is a lot of money, and then you consider the fact you did the trade value is certainly fine, as we've discussed. I mean, on the flip side, I don't see how you can give the Panthers anything but an F, even if you don't account for the trade that they turned down with the Rams, multiple firsts. I mean, just as a whole, from a process standpoint, it really doesn't get worse than this. It doesn't, right? Because when it was reported that they turned down that trade, I was kind of shocked at the time because I don't know, the timeline of the team, I like Brian Burns. I don't view him as like a top 7 edge rusher in the league. He's kind of in that next tier. He's very good. Don't get me wrong. But the thinking was, okay, this is a team that is not very good. sometimes not very good teams are willing to hold on to very good players to make them the cornerstone of a rebuild. So the thinking was, okay, they're turning this down. Surely there must be a plan to get a deal done. Nope. Oh. No plan. And not only was there no plan, to let him walk for this little is insane. I can't wrap my mind around it. I promise the cope is coming, but I cannot wrap my mind around it. I cannot.
Sure. And I wonder if we might be in the same place for where the potential cope might be, because I do maybe have a spin there too. It's tough. And I've seen some people say that, you can't really judge it like that because it's a new regime, but like the guy in charge, very in charge when the original decline of the trade was in place. That man is still in charge of a lot of decisions. So I'm not fully giving them the full, it's a different regime. So, graded on a curve.
Well, the new GM or the previous regime. I mean, maybe he was.
That's sure. Yeah. Right. He was there too. But it's tough. Again, like this should be a player that goes for a first round pick. Just in terms of that. And again, to not, I can understand if the Panthers kind of saw 141, which I think it's more of the real deal without some of the escalators. That's still a lot of money. I could see the Panthers saying that's not necessarily our timeline right now, but like you knew that before. I don't think that price really should have come as a surprise, especially with the leverage that Burns had after they declined the trade, after he was franchised. Like his free agency should not have come as a shock to Carolina. So yeah, I don't really know. I don't really know what that defense looks like now. I don't really know
who are the Carolina players. Chin's in Washington. Luvu's also in Washington. Derrick Brown. That's it. JC Horn, if he's healthy.
And I'd call about both of them if I was an opposing GM.
Brutal. Okay, yeah, the coat. Do we have okay, let's see if we have the same coat. So the Panthers do not have their first round pick this year because they traded it for Bryce Young. They have invested heavily in the interior offensive line. We'll get to one of those really a mega signing on that front. My cope is that they are all in on improving the offense to make Bryce Young work, because that it will largely determine whether or not this team has any chance in its current iteration of succeeding, and that they needed draft capital to go trade for T. Higgins.
Yeah. So I have them as like an incomplete right now, and I will bump their grade up a little bit if they do swing one of their seconds for T. Higgins.
Okay. Same
that's where I was too. Yeah. And I don't think that's going to happen, because I don't think that gets it done for what Cincinnati wants. But if you're Carolina, like that, I think that has to be plan A with what you're doing right now. You have to be trying to swing for a Higgins, or if he's not available, like you start like we'll get to their guards. Like they have to overpay to get some guys in. Yeah. So if you have to start begging some teams around the league for maybe some other receivers who might be on the market, you do that because you need talent to be coming in, and because it's not going to be worth it if, again, you're relying on like Adam Thielen again and hoping Jonathan Mingo is a thing, which the rookie season didn't give you a big case for optimism. So yeah, it's tough. So if they can swing T. Higgins, that helps. Again, that's not a cure-all. I'm not sure if in the situation like Brian Burns for T. Higgins, maybe you view that as a favorable for Higgins. But yeah, I think that has to be plan A. And like if they aren't able to do that, then it's still really tough.
But then what's so tricky about that too is like this is such a good draft for wide receivers. There's no like the odds of you finding the next T. Higgins in this draft are much higher than finding the next Brian Burns. So like it also strikes me as a total miscalculation of the draft. I mean, yeah. I feel bad for Panthers fans, but listen, if you get T. Higgins and he unlocks Bryce Young, then you could argue it was worth it. So a lot of things have to happen. All right, before we take a break and get to the quarterbacks, let's talk about Christian Wilkins. this was a mammoth deal.
Yeah.
4 years, $110 million. Puts him under the Chris Joneses of the world, but still mammoth. 85 guaranteed. I don't know if that was actually all real guarantees, but I should probably figure that out. But it's a lot. So my first reaction is Christian Wilkins spiritually feels like a Raider, and functionally is going to be incredibly fun to watch next to Max Crosby. I've had this kind of running joke where the Raiders are good at Max Crosby, is like just what, like, because it's just the defense was so bad for so long outside of Max Crosby. Yep. But this is actually an ascending group that played pretty good football at the end of last year, took some pretty significant steps forward. They've, I think, landed on some, later round draft picks, and guys like Malcolm Kuntz play really well for them, for example. Now you bring in Christian Wilkins, who, throughout his tenure in Miami was just a very complete player. He's excellent against the run. Performance dropped off a little bit by some of our metrics last year. I suspect has something to do with what was being asked of him. And then you saw his pass rush prediction increase as years go on. Some of those numbers not as great last year. He did have 14 sacks created, which tied for 5th in the NFL. Got to play next to some pretty good edge rushers. But I'm just telling you, when I watch him on tape, I think he's awesome. He's such a good football player. I think so just the player alone, Dan, to me, like, this is a premium, but you pay a premium for the best players.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of what we talked about, is you don't get these types of players on the market. And I think it was a very specific situation in Miami where they couldn't even franchise him. Just because of their cap situation. So they couldn't even get that to work a little bit. I think as of right now, when we're talking before, the league year starts, Miami's still over the cap, I'm pretty sure. So, it's just one of those situations where you don't get the type of player like this on the market. So yeah, $27.5 million per year, that is a lot, but I think we're kind of seeing teams start to value that interior player, whether it's a rusher or a run defender, which Christian Wilkins is both. They're valuing that more. So, the 3-year cash of like $84 million, it's about $10 million behind Jones and Donald, about $10 million above Matabuke, which is a fine place. I think the Justin Matabuke deal looks better right now of what he would have gotten if he was a free agent, to get him, signed right off the tag. Christian Wilkins is such a good run defender. The last 2 years, like you said, not so much 2023, but I think he kind of struggled a little bit in the gap and a half type of Fangio thing. He was much better as kind of a one gap shooter, where it was like almost on 20% of his run defense snaps, he was making a tackle, which is absolutely insane. So, and that was in both 2021 and 2022. He was over 20%, which is crazy. So he can play end in odd fronts if you need him to. He can play kind of all over that line in the interior. And again, like you said, gives Max Crosby definitely the best secondary player that has been on that defensive line that entire time. And the Raiders did a lot of fun things kind of once Antonio Pierce took over. And I think Patrick Graham was able to let loose a little bit and wasn't as constricted, I think, in what he was asked to do on defense. So they played with more light boxes over that second half of the season, but they were better in run defense, had one of the lower rush success rates. They really stopped blitzing, but then they had a better pass rush. So I think they had a much better 4-man rush at the end of the year, which I think Wilkins is definitely going to help with in the middle of that line. So there's a lot to like. They were 4th in EPA per play after Antonio Pierce took over on defense. They're 12th in success rate, but still, that's pretty good. And again, like, I'm not totally sure that's going to carry over, but they were doing some good things. And those were, they were in that stretch. There were games against the Chiefs and the Dolphins. So, it wasn't like they were beaten up on some bad teams. So I think conceptually, I like what this defense is going to do. The Raiders are, again, one of these teams where I have a complete question of what exactly are they and what is their goal? Like, are they trying to win games like 10-7? which like that's something that's never failed before. So
yeah,
I'm not totally sure what the Raiders are right now, but at least part of it is going to be fun, which I think is more than we can.
I think there's something to be said for. We'll talk about their quarterback signing late in a second. There's something to be said for we're in a division with Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert. Let's just have like the nastiest defense, which I don't think they do yet. They have like a good ascendant defense, but this isn't like that Broncos team that went to the Super Bowl. You know, like they're not. I guess if Tyree Wilson takes a step, you know, he missed a lot of last year. Then coupled with Crosby and Wilkins and Kuntz, you have a pretty nasty front. We'll see. I too struggle to kind of wrap my mind around what their goals are, but I still give this deal a B+, because that just the grade is brought down a little bit for me because of the value, but I think the player is fantastic. So.
Yeah, I have it as a B because I love Christian Wilkins. He's so fun. I'm sad he had to leave Miami because I think that was just like a really good situation of where he was. But I will have fun watching him wherever he goes. So, all
right, let's take a quick break, come back, and finally get to Kirk Cousins.
Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words: Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the types of benefits only Caesars can offer. Hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire.
Kirklanta. So I've been talking about this for a while. It was around the combine when I first realized that it was probably going to happen. 4 years, $180 million, about 100 is guaranteed. Which is interesting because I think it's actually the first Kirk Cousins deal that isn't like, well, actually his last extension wasn't a full guarantee, but it like basically was.
It pretty much was, yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot of money. Before we talk about the value, let's talk about the football fit. There's a reason why everybody thought the Falcons would sign Kirk. I think when they fired Arthur Smith, and then when Raheem Morris brought over Zach Robinson, and it became clear this is kind of going to be Rams East, I guess. Kirk Cousins, sort of like a specter, hung over it all because it just seemed obvious. We don't know exactly what this offense would look like. There's been different versions of the Rams offense. We should say that with when Zach Robinson has been there. Under Sean McVay. There's been versions with more of a zone run game, more last year of a duo run game. You had Matt Stafford, shifting away from the play action, more empty, all sorts of things. But we just saw Kirk play really good football in an offense with Kevin O'Connell that really, bore some pretty similar hallmarks to things we've seen out of LA in recent years. Those condensed formations, the wide zone run game, play action, attacking the middle of the field. So it was just very easy to imagine Kirk Cousins being transported to this Atlanta team, surrounded by pieces that we all believe are good, but have not been proven to be so because of the quarterback play.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that really stands out of why Atlanta was that fit, was because there was that ready-made situation. And I think that works both ways. I don't think you should be interested in a Kirk Cousins if you didn't have that in place. Like, again, he's, mid to late 30s, coming off an Achilles injury. Like, he's not sitting around in a rebuild. He's not the type of guy you do that. So you kind of just need that instant type of jolt to the offense. So we do have a lot of similar things in place. I think it is going to be a better offensive line. You get Drake London. Drake London is so good. Again, like, he's not usually the guy we talk about as, the potential untapped in this offense. It's a lot of, Kyle Pitts and what has been done at tight end for the Falcons under Arthur Smith. Drake London is so good. Like, he is a true number one who has those traits, can get open. I remember coming out of the draft, just because he was so big, people say he didn't separate. He separates really well. And I think he's going to have some of those things over the middle. I think he can go deep. you now add, maybe we'll talk about him later, but Darnell Mooney, who I think is a fun kind of number 2 that they can add to that offense that gives them a little more of a vertical. I think that rounds out this offense really well. That's going to work for what Kirk Cousins is. And again, there's a little hesitation of him coming off that Achilles, but he was already a quarterback last year that really mastered his pocket manipulation. I think it was the best he's done really at any point in his career. And so much of it was in the pocket. So it's not like he has to learn a new game.
Right.
He had, I believe, the 4th highest rate of dropbacks that ended in the pocket last year. So like he wasn't going anywhere. So this isn't really even like an Aaron Rodgers situation where he has to kind of relearn with decreased mobility a little bit coming out of his injury. So that is what he does. And on straight dropbacks, he had one of the lowest pressure to sack rates. So he is a guy who was able to, and that was with so much pressure. He got hit so often.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, I kind of wrote about Kirk Cousins last week, and I'm kind of surprised his injury was like a non-contact with how often like he
and
got
when
hit.
He got hit, he would get like folded.
It was
too.
hard.
Yeah.
But he was able to get the ball out, and there was still productive plays. So I'm not like in terms of a quarterback in his mid-30s coming off an Achilles injury, I don't think Kirk Cousins has to really readjust his game a lot. Yeah. So I'm a little more confident in that kind of translating once he comes back. It's so true.
And what a great spin zone. It's like, yeah, he's a 36-year-old and coming off an Achilles, but it's not like he was moving. He wasn't going anywhere. So no, I love that. I love your point too about his pocket manipulation, because I've talked a lot about like, I kind of joke about how I've been Kirk pilled over the last couple of years. I used to be really hard on him, but
he's also improved.
He really has improved. And
Kirk pill. Yeah.
I think that's one of the things he's improved at that I haven't really talked about enough. Also, his aggression, throwing the ball downfield, some of the throws that he'll attempt. I think he is like a smart quarterback. He's always had a good command of the offense, but I think. One thing I like for Atlanta too is because I suspect there'll be so much shared DNA with this offense. It's not like he has to learn an entirely new system. And the thing about Atlanta is this is a deal you make to contend immediately. So bringing in a quarterback who you've seen operate a similar offense, knowing that he kind of hit the ground running is really, really important. To that end, my feeling about the Falcons, which is you do this deal because you want to win the division. You're now the favorites to win the division, but everybody's asking, okay, well, can you go beyond the division? This has been a question with Kirk Cousins, how far can he take you? But let me look away from Kirk Cousins and saying, considering the fact that I believe Atlanta, you make this deal thinking that you not only want to win the division, but you want to go farther. I would really like to see them continue improving the defense as well. Yeah. Their defensive coordinator, Ryan Nielsen, is gone. That was a big loss because I thought he did a really good job last year. They really improved in run defense, finished 11th in DVOA. But the pass defense was still a problem. And the issue remains the one that has been the issue with this defense now for years and years, which is they do not have edge rush. 32nd in ESPN's pass rush win rate. I was looking at individual players to see who the highest ranked pass rusher in terms of win rate was on the Falcons. Can you guess who it was?
Are we talking just
everyone, all the defensive line?
Oh, it's Calais Campbell.
Yes, Calais Campbell, who's older than me, I think. In any case,
yeah,
they really need to upgrade there. Whether there's still some edge rushers out there in free agency, there's some pretty nice options, but they also have the 8th pick in the draft, which now that they have Cousins, it seems more likely than not that'll be like Dallas Turner or something, in which they're really situated nicely, Dan, because everyone else is going offense. You do not need more skill players. Please, you need to find an edge rusher. Enough. Atlanta, pass rush, pass rush, pass rush, pass rush. Because that is the thing that potentially is going to keep you from going farther in the playoffs, not Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, and even with that offense, I think you kind of look around the landscape of the NFC, kind of look at the teams that were really good last year. They were like even we don't want to get into like a Brock Purdy conversation right now, but like that type of quarterback can win in the NFC when the skill positions are around him are very good. Like we can see that type, like maybe if, Kirk went to a team in the AFC, like if he goes to Denver or something, like we're not as high on this, but I think because of where he landed, kind of the situation in general, I think it really helps Atlanta. I think they can be contenders they can be one of the top 4 teams in the NFC. I wouldn't be surprised by that at the end of the year. But you're right. I think a lot of it does come down to the defense, how well they can continue to put that together, because there's not a lot of talent there right now. Jesse Bates helps a lot of things in the secondary, but there's still AJ Terrell is up and down, like has flashes of being great, but also kind of highly volatile. There's still a lot. I hope Raheem Morris can bring a lot of good things to that defense. So if that does improve, like this can be a really good team.
I give Kirk an A-. I just think this team, he was by far the best quarterback available. This is a team that I didn't see, I don't believe, had a path to a better option, especially picking where they are in the draft. I know they've been linked to Justin Fields a lot. We're certainly seeing what the NFL thinks of Fields and his value. So for me, when you consider the timeline of the team, the player, the fit, their options, I just feel like this was the best possible way this could have gone for the Falcons.
Yeah, absolutely. I had it as a B. And I think one of those other things is like when we talk about the guarantees, how it wasn't fully guaranteed, even with the 4 years, like there's an out after year 2 if they want that. So if Kirk doesn't really bounce back this year, they can use next year to maybe draft a quarterback. Although I don't know about the class. I've been told that it's not great, but I haven't dug that too far in there. But you can do that and have the guy sit behind Kirk, who could be then on a lame duck year then in 2025, because there's not a lot that they're committed to in 2026. So there are outs here, which I don't think Atlanta has like boxed themselves into Kirk Cousins either, which I think is helpful, especially for a deal this big. Obviously, they are paying him a lot, but this isn't something that where, it's 4 years guaranteed and they're, after year 2, they're really trying to figure out how to get out of it. So I think with all of that combined, I think this is a really good deal, and probably, it leaves Minnesota in a tough place, but I think outside of that, definitely the best place he could have landed.
Minnesota in the coming days will be a major topic of discussion on this pod. But first, I have yet to, this happened between my last taping and this one. Russell Wilson became a Pittsburgh Steeler. Value, like, it's really hard for me to give this anything less than an A, given the fact that they're paying Russell Wilson $1.2 million, which is like 1/10, 15th of a Gardner Minshew, apparently. No, it's amazing. I mean, I think if you're a Steelers fan, the only objection you would have is if you wanted your team to swing, but I don't know exactly who they would have swung for. I guess Justin Fields would be the player where you thought maybe there's more upside there for Pittsburgh, and I would actually understand and accept that argument. But outside of Fields, Dan, to me, there's nothing better that Pittsburgh could have done.
Yeah, I think that says a lot about Pittsburgh too. In a way, and kind of where they were situated, and kind of the digging their heels in on the quarterbacks that they had. And again, without Russell Wilson, it kind of seems like they were going to go into this season with Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph again, and just, running that back for another year. So again, like you said, with the value, it is hard to argue with. And I think if you are disappointed for Pittsburgh, it is like, this is just kind of, so they'll win 9 games again, which I guess is fine. And that's what Pittsburgh is kind of aiming for, which is tough. I guess there are worse things to do in the NFL. But yeah, it is tough to see the upside. And again, I am interested in how this fit is going to take place, because we do see a lot of things that could work for Russell Wilson. The heavy play action from Arthur Smith. I think like that is going to be one of those things that to rely on. And I think for Russ to be a success in Pittsburgh, it kind of has to be like really old Russ. This is, low volume, heavy play action. You do what is inside the structure, because I think we just kind of saw when like Russell Wilson wants to really run like what Russell Wilson thinks the Russell Wilson offense should be. It doesn't work, especially at his age and now. I think you saw with how often he was still trying to get out of the pocket last year and just didn't work. There were 7 quarterbacks with 100 or more dropbacks with 4 seconds or more. Russ was 7th in EPA per play of that group.
I think the biggest negative is just the sacks, because like he's going to turn the ball over less. Takes good care of the football, and that's certainly the formula that you described: heavy play action, run the ball, that kind of. Him turning it over less will help, but those sacks are real drive killers. The mobility thing is interesting. Watching him last year, he was clearly more mobile, right? He had lost weight, and you saw that, I thought, on designed carries, and actually amongst higher volume rushing quarterbacks, he finished 3rd in success rate and 4th in EPA per play with the ball in his hands, which is pretty damn impressive. And I think is going to be a part of this Pittsburgh offense, but he can't get away with the play extension anymore. It's different, right? Like he used to be where you had the design carry game. He's not the runner he was. And he would also run around in the backfield and then suddenly make a magical throw. That part of the game is still pretty inconsistent, and that's what leads to a lot of those sacks. The fit with Smith is interesting. There's like pros and cons based on what we've seen out of both of these guys. The play action numbers are obviously Russ is a very good play action quarterback. Arthur Smith is a play action play caller. And I'm certainly not the first person to talk about this. A lot of Smith's offense involves attacking the middle of the field. 2019 Ryan Tannehill is kind of the apex of this. Russ doesn't throw to the middle of the field. The other thing I think, though, that'll be interesting to see is Russ last year was really good at play action out of the gun. He actually had the best QBR in the NFL. Smith, it's a little bit more under center. So I think what I want to see is like, okay, can these guys how does Arthur Smith evolve his offense a little bit to accommodate who Russell Wilson is as quarterback? Because there's one thing I know about Russell Wilson is you gotta make some accommodations. I do love this, obviously, for like George Pickens. I mean, Russ still throws a beautiful deep ball. We saw that. Yeah. Sutton loved him for a reason last year. And he's definitely the best deep ball thrower on the roster right now. So, I like I said, I ended up giving this an A- just because of the value. And it's because it's a 1-year deal. So it's not like it's not just the value. They're not tied to him after this season. Will they be in a better position to take a quarterback? Will there be better quarterbacks available? I don't know, but they weren't in position this year. So I understand, it's not thrilling, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And it actually, what's your grade before I transition?
Yeah, I just had it as a C+, just because
hater.
Yep.
That actually transitions me though to this question, which is, would you rather have Russell Wilson for $1.5 million or Baker Mayfield on a 3-year, $100 million contract? That's really, okay, I should say that first. It's really a 1-year, $40 million deal, or if they don't cut him, I think next March they'll have to make a decision. Then it becomes 2 years, $20 million, or it's probably $60 million. So it's kind of Geno-ish, Geno plus, I would describe it. It's more money. But yeah, which would you rather have?
I think
such a toxic question.
It really is. Like this, we could get a whole day of Twitter discourse on this in like June, when nothing else is happening. I think I am going to lean Baker because I think he kind of learned some of the things we're hoping Russ learns this from this past year, because I think Baker was a lot more confident in the pocket. I think he stayed in the pocket more.
He did.
When he had to. He was much less, when his worst tendency in Cleveland was to bail from the pocket before he had to. And I don't think he did that quite as much last year. So I think that's part of it. I think if you can kind of tone him down a little bit, he was great on third downs last year, had I think the 3rd highest EPA per play on third downs. A lot of that was because first downs didn't really work because they were taking a lot of shots down the field, and those didn't work out. So I think if you can kind of calibrate
terribly.
that, sorry, yes, So I think if you can calibrate that a little bit, you can get a little more success on early downs. That'll take away some of the what they needed to do on third downs to convert. So, but I think kind of, and a lot of it last year, he had the best success that he's had in his career outside of like 2020 to the short and intermediate area of the field. And when he did that with Stefanski, that was like heavily play action. And there was a lot of, training wheels put on that. It was a lot more straight drop back from him last year. So I think he controlled that part of the game a little more. So I am a little more optimistic about him kind of translating that into another year, another offense with the weapons that they have. And I think it's a good place for him. I think there was actual development from him in the pocket last year, which I think is going to help going forward.
Baker's really tricky as an eval because on one hand you can say, well, he was good last year, but he was awful in Carolina. And then he was okay in Cleveland, but then he was awful at the end. But there's so many confounding factors. I mean, just constant change in play callers, horrible situations, injury in Cleveland. To me, like, I don't really feel like we have a good sense of who he is as a quarterback. And he could be on like a Kirk Cousins type trajectory where he is just getting better as he enters his late 20s and in Tampa is in a stable situation. They do lose Dave Canales. You bring in Liam Cohen, who he knows from Los Angeles, who was with Kentucky, was with the Rams a bit. So again, I think there'll be a lot of similarities in offense. Maybe a bit more play action, more motion. We'll see. But bring back Evans, we talked about. It's the Russ Baker question is kind of poisonous because the answer is it depends. Like, I wouldn't like Baker more in Pittsburgh and I wouldn't like Russ more in Tampa. Context is kind of everything with these guys. Obviously, though, with that amount of money savings, Pittsburgh now can really, do other things in free agency, pay their guys. There's some huge advantages that come with a guy on that kind of contract. But yeah, I ended up giving this Baker deal a B, and it's not outrageous by any means. And I think it's more likely than not that next year he looks like he did this last year than the previous year is how I feel.
Yeah, I think that too. I had it as a B. So we will agree there. And again, the fact that they can kind of get out of it and this isn't just the Daniel Jones deal in general. He was well below that money. And the fact that it was structured in a way you can get out of it after 1 year, I think is a huge boost for what Tampa is looking for.
That's a great point. Okay, so I have next week I'm having Dan Orlovsky on the show. It's been a long time. And we're going to talk about the Vikings and the Raiders and kind of all of the teams that are still like, we're not sure what they're going to do at quarterback. There is only one more deal that I wanted to hit. It's not the Mac Jones trade. What sort of tangential? So the Patriots traded away Mac Jones and they brought back Jacoby Brissett 1 year, $8 million. How is Jacoby only getting $8 million when Sam Darnold's getting more, Gardner Minshew's getting significantly more? He has played better than both of this is my ongoing plight. Honestly, I feel like I should get a sign or like some kind of badge for being a Jacoby Brissett enthusiast over the last few years. But
I'm with you.
Like, this is amazing to me that good for him. He's putting together this nice kind of backup career, and all signs point towards New England, by the way, using their pick on a quarterback with these two combination of these things. But incredible value to bring back a player who, if needed, can and will start at a competent level.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at what it was really tough seeing all the backup quarterbacks playing last year. And Jacoby Brissett just.
And then when he did play, he was really good. Shocker. Yeah. He's great.
Like immediately an upgrade over what they were doing. So yeah, it's a good deal. And again, the Sam Darnold thing was up to $10 million.
Okay.
And I'm going to hope the up to is like one of the all-time heavy lifts.
Yeah.
Because I haven't seen another report on that since. But again, Jacoby Brissett is the exact type of quarterback. If you are the Patriots and what you're looking at in this situation, where you have a roster influx, he's going to come in, he's going to be good. He has a history, obviously, with the Patriots, with Alex Van Pelt, who's the new OC. So yeah, it's good. Jacoby Brissett is a very good quarterback who is going to give you competent quarterback play, which is more than you can ask for a lot of these backups that are going to be signing from here on out.
I wish he was in Minnesota or Vegas, teams where, I mean, because I really think the Patriots are going to draft someone, but I'm going to get into those teams next week. So, all right. I managed the clock horribly, but we are going to rapid fire grade a ton of signings. I'm going to get through as many as I can. Are you ready to do this?
Let's do it.
Okay. Yeah. I'll say we'll alternate who grades first. You go first on Patrick Queen. So Patrick Queen signs with the Pittsburgh Steelers, 3 years, $41 million. Linebacker has been a problem with the Steelers defense ever since the retirement of Ryan Shazier. In Patrick Queen, they get, they did pay a pretty penny for him, given some of these other linebacker deals coming in. How do you like this signing?
Yeah, I went with the C because I still want to know what he does without Roquan Smith and Landon Roberts, Cole Holcomb, not Roquan Smith. So I think he did get better as a linebacker last year. But again, he's still much better going forward. And I think that kind of is what the other linebackers in this group also have for Pittsburgh. So I'm a little worried about, who is really going to be in charge of that group and kind of patrol the middle of the field. It's great that it's not kind of like the running back that's not over like what Tremaine Edmonds got. So we didn't really see this explosion of off-ball linebacker. Right. Because he got 472 last year for 18 million. So this is less than that, which is okay. But I'm hesitant to know what he is without Roquan Smith. Yeah,
I'm with you there. It's like behind that, like the front is obviously very, very strong in Pittsburgh. Yeah. And I do think he improved both in run defense, tackling, coverage. It wasn't just like, I've talked about this, when he first brought in Roquan, it was like, hey, now we can just point and shoot Queen. Yeah. You saw last year, I think he has improved at the mental side of playing linebacker as well. But it's a pretty dramatic shift, and he will be playing with that is about as far as you can get from Roquan Smith. So we'll see how it goes. I went B-. I'm a huge fan of the player, and we'll see. Okay. Bryce Huff to the Eagles, 3 years, $51 million. So that comes out to about 17 a year, $34 million guaranteed. This one's hard for me to evaluate because there's these pending trade requests in Philadelphia for both Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat. So when this happened, it was like my first reaction was, so Bryce Huff, for those who don't know, was a rotational pass rusher with the Jets, who was kind of like a nerd favorite because he was like a small sample size god, right? All the advanced numbers loved him, but he's not an every down pass rusher. Question is that something about Bryce Huff and his run defense and whatever, or is it because the Jets are just so damn deep on the defensive line? I don't really know. We will potentially find out. So, but when the trade first happened, I was like, oh, great. He goes from one really deep defensive line to another, because when we think of the Eagles, we think of their depth and like sending waves of pass rushers. Except if they trade one of those guys, they are no longer that deep. And this is going to look very different. Fletcher Cox is retired. Brandon Graham's back, but this is like a little bit of an open question for here. Ultimately, I'm going to go B+ because I still think he's a really good player and he's exciting. And, maybe if he's brought in to replace Hassan Reddick, he's a kind of lean edge rusher, less of a run defender. I don't know if you're like getting that much of a downgrade, but it feels like a bet on something we haven't seen.
Yeah, it is. I went B+ too, because I love the player. When you talk about the nerds who were in on him early, like I was there. I think I was like the president of this fan club. Going back to when he came out of college, he led college football in pressures his last year college. So like, this isn't some guy who just kind of came out of nowhere. He didn't play for like a Power 5 school, but like he was good rushing the passer, and that's something that has translated. He has one of the quickest get-offs in the league, and part of that helps because he's usually in passing situations where he gets that. But again, I think the value that he brings with the pass rush is so good that even if he doesn't stand up as like a great run defender, I think that the value is still there, especially with this deal. Like we were rumored that he could go like over $20 million a year if there was like a real desperate team, and that just didn't happen. This is under Harold Landry. It's around Alex Highsmith, so I'm fine with this. Even if he doesn't turn into like this really well-rounded all-around player, I think what he brings in the pass rush is good enough. Even if there is a trade or not of one of those other pass rushers.
The Carolina Panthers, this was perhaps the most shocking deal. This was the offensive line equivalent of Christian Kirk. Robert Hunt, 5 years, $100 million, 63 guaranteed. Boom. The Panthers, should be noted, also signed Damian Lewis, not the Billions actor, but the Seahawks guard, to a 4-year, $53 million deal, signifying a pretty obvious and deliberate strategy. They are wiping the slate clean with this offensive line, at least on the interior. They are investing heavily in it, following the New Orleans model of trying to protect their mini quarterback up front. I like that side of it. I do. But this is a lot of money for a player who was good, but I did not. This is pretty stunning to me, especially like, I don't know, coming out of Miami. They're probably smarter than people than me. They're definitely smart. People are smarter than me and can evaluate these guys in pass pro. But like, that's such a hard. It's been so hard because Tua gets rid of the ball so quickly for me to get a sense of how good at pass protection some of these players are.
So I think there's an underrated part of that is by design for the offensive line. And I think a lot of that kind of gets put on, they're doing it for Tua because he can get the ball out and those receivers are so fast. But I think a lot of it is masking some of the offensive linemen and not asking them to hold up in pass protection for too long. Because I think when you look at run or pass block win rate, which is, up to 2.5 seconds, but if the ball is out within 2.5 seconds, it's null.
Yes.
So when you look at what they actually track, Miami did not come out as a good pass blocking team last year. So when you kind of look at Hunt and Lewis, they're not the greatest pass blockers. So if you're trying to beef up the offensive line to help the interior for Bryce Young, I'm not sure those are the two guys that you would really be going for. Again, there weren't really great pass blocking guards here on the market in general, but to give this amount of money, it's definitely an overpay to get these guys into Carolina because of just gestures wildly at Carolina. But it's going to be good for the run game because these guys are two good run blockers. Hunt is very good run blocking, especially with what we saw in Miami last year. Lewis has gotten better, I think, every year. So I'm not totally sure what Carolina wants to do. If they want to maybe take a little bit off Bryce Young as he develops, then that's okay.
Clearly,
like, this is not
right?
Is not right. But this is not like the Saints coming in and bringing some great pass protecting guards for Drew Brees.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the type of real shift that they're going for. If it is, like, that's a benefit, but that's not what these two players have been to this point.
It is interesting, the decision to invest heavily in interior offensive line over pass catchers thus far.
The other thing is, where are those pass catchers coming from? So I kind of see they have to upgrade somewhere.
There's no,
like
right.
we were talking about earlier, they have to be throwing themselves at T. Higgins and hoping Cincinnati lets him go because there really isn't another path.
Well, to that end, the sort of one big pass catcher deal that I wanted to talk to you about is Gabe Davis, who was the speedy, big, blocking, downfield threat. Pittman Jr. signed a totally reasonable deal with Indianapolis. But the Gabe Davis one, $39 million, 3 years. So it comes to about $13 a year. couple weeks ago, I was on the Dan Le Batard show, and I asked, like, when are teams going to stop investing in receiver, knowing how good rookies are and how amazing the draft is and this draft is. And then I said a caveat, which is like, but there's players like Higgins. I think even Pittman Jr., I would, probably is like, that's the tier. Mike Evans, Higgins. I already said Higgins. Gabe Davis is not in that tier, man. Like, this signing to me, I think he's a good player, and it's not a crazy contract. However, given Jacksonville's needs, we're talking about, going back to what I said about the receivers and youth, they're spending so much money at this position on, like, good players. Kirk, Davis. They paid Ingram, who will count as a pass catcher. But strategically, why would that be your approach, knowing that that's a position you can get so much production out of in the draft? I don't get it.
Yeah, so this was a big effort to sign Gabriel Davis, not only like as early as they did, but there's a $10 million roster bonus that's pushed into void years. So they're already spreading $10 million over 5 years for this deal, like just to kind of hit their books correctly, which again, that's a lot of effort for a player of Gabe Davis. And it's one of those things where I like this better if they re-sign Calvin Ridley, which is a whole other thing. It seems like they're waiting for free agency to officially open, so their compensation they have to give to Atlanta is less, or at least that's what Ridley is kind of waiting for. Yeah, so if Ridley signs after the start of free agency, I think it's only a 3rd round pick that they have to give to Atlanta for the trade. But if he signed before that, they'd have to give a 2nd. So I think that's a little strategic. But in terms of Gabe Davis, like, if Ridley does come back, like you said, again, that's a whole lot that they are giving up for and paying for wide receivers. So, and that's still not like the greatest group. And again, Gabe Davis, Jacksonville needs a deep threat, right? They had no downfield juice, and they didn't really use Calvin Ridley in that way.
There's so many in the draft. There's so many deep threats in the draft.
The other thing, yeah, and Davis wasn't getting a lot of targets in the Buffalo offense when he was the clear number 2 for most of the time. And I think we saw at the end of the season when Khalil Shakir took over, he was one of the most efficient wide receivers in the league. And I'm excited to see what he does as he gets a bigger role, hopefully. So I just think this is a lot to give up for Gabe Davis, but this is kind of what Jacksonville does. They go real early on guys they don't really need, like Darnell Savage. Balky. They also kind of jumped in on when they didn't really need to in this safety market. So this is it's a very Jacksonville move that I can see where they're coming from. He does play a position that they do need, but I would have just looked elsewhere.
Okay. Now we got to go super rapid fire. I'm gonna try to keep all of my analysis to under 30 seconds or so. Jonathan Grenard, big deal with Minnesota, 4 years, $76 million, comes to under $20 million a year, 42 guaranteed. He is an NFL nerd darling because the advanced metrics loved him. Houston, he is every down player. He's good in run defense as well. They also signed Andrew Van Ginkel, so they're replacing Danielle Hunter, who remains still out there, with those 2 players. Both of whom I think are like a really good fit for what Brian Flores wants to do. So I skipped the grades. I give the Davis thing a C.
I was C-.
C-, okay. Grenard, I'm going to give a B+, and Van Ginkel, who also he can cover, he's super athletic. I'm going to give that one, the contract's obviously a lot less, that one a B+.
Yeah, I was the same, B+ and B. Love Grenard. What he can do on the edge is great. And Van Ginkel is the perfect kind of Brian Flores type of guy. Again, he was with Flores in Miami. He's a guy who can play off ball and be a heavy blitzer. He can play off the edge. He can cover when asked to.
Yes.
He was one of the top coverage linebackers in yards allowed per coverage snap last year. So yeah, this is a great fit, and I like Minnesota adding some talent there for the pass rush.
Getting younger.
It's good.
Xavier McKinney to the Packers, 4 years, $68 million. So this is a premium. It still comes under Jesse Bates, $17 million a year. I absolutely loved this. The new defensive coordinator, Jeff Hafley, who in college, Boston College, a lot more single high. So they really needed a safety who could be like that center fielder, play the post. And which McKinney has done, did in college. He did early in New York, but he kind of has played everything with Martindale. Plays obviously a lot of man coverage, a lot of cover one. To me, this is like, it was interesting for Green Bay too, because this is not really what they do. They don't pay premium in free agency. And they certainly don't go out and get sort of the best player available, depending on how you view him and Justin Simmons. To me, I gave an A- just because I love that they did that. Frankly, it shows like kind of a recognition of like, okay, our homegrown approach to defense has not been paying off.
Yeah, Mina, we are way too nerdy for speed rounds, but I gave this an A too. This is my 1A that I
wow.
Gave I love this. This is the perfect player for that defense. I love what Xavier McKinney did. If I had a hypothetical like All-Pro ballot from this past year, he would have been second team All-Pro for me. He's just so good. He can do everything. 30.8% tight window rate was the highest on targets for safeties. So he can play that single high. He can play split safety. He can cover in the slot. I just think he can do everything you want a safety to do. And again, he's young, so it fits with the Packers. I love this. I don't want to, again, talk myself into a Packers defensive revival here, but yes. As someone who has long been on a Chargers bandwagon, which I think you know well also, this is a great signing. I love that fit.
Okay, Leonard Williams returning to the Seahawks. I think it was 3 years, $64 million. So that's about 20 and change, 43 guaranteed. So look, this kind of depends on how you view it. If you're looking at it on its own, or if you're looking at it with the trade last year. With the trade, awful, bad trade, bad call on the part of the Seahawks, a misevaluation of their own prospects. But setting that aside as a sunk cost and just thinking about the player. I will say this: he was by far the best player on the Seahawks defense the second half of the season. For anyone who watched them closely, he was really disruptive. He was really good at run defense. Unfortunately, he was often the only one on that defensive line. They didn't have an edge rush to help him. It was a real problem with Chenanosu going out. To me, this is a B-. I'm just kind of. It is a pretty hefty. It's still a pretty hefty contract to give a player who is kind of firmly in that second tier. He's not a top tier player, but if he were to play, and he's 30, but if he were to play, and I actually generally have realized favor giving older defensive tackles big contracts because they can still play at such a high level. And if he continues to play out his contract the way he did last year after coming to Seattle, I think that it'll be worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. I gave this a C just because it is still a lot of money, but he was better in Seattle than he was earlier in the season with the Giants. So not only was he the best defender on that defensive line for Seattle over the last stretch of the season, it was much better than he was playing with the Giants. But when you look, it's like between DeForest Buckner and Daron Payne for, what he's playing. But I also trust Mike Macdonald to kind of figure out what to do with him to get him in some positions to be even better than he was over that second half of the season last year. So again, it's a lot of money, which I probably wouldn't have done, but I do kind of have some trust in what it could potentially be going forward.
He's going to have to be good because they don't have any linebackers or safeties at the moment. Speaking of those linebackers, let's just do a couple more deals. Jordan Brooks went to Miami, 3 years, $27 million, which comes under $9 million a year. I think that's great value for Miami. I think he's an ascending player, got better in coverage during his course of his career in Seattle. So value-wise, some of the other deals we talked about comes in way below Patrick Queen, for example. That's a good signing. I give that an A-.
Yeah, okay. I had it as a B, and like what he was asked to do was hard. I think last year, kind of covering for what Bobby Wagner couldn't do a little bit. So I think his degree of difficulty last year was a little tougher. You pair him with either Anthony Walker or David Long. Anthony Walker, who Miami just signed, also David Long, who the nerd favorite Miami signed last year. So I think that's a fun linebacker group. So in terms of what this deal could have been, what some of the other linebackers are, great value. I had it as a B.
The final one there's so many contracts. I'm Sorry, guys. I because I mismanaged this. We're not getting to any of them. I mean, speaking of NFL Nerd Twitter favorites, Frankie Louvu and Jeremy Jones signed in Washington, which is cool. And I'm very curious to see kind of what the next iteration of that defense is.
Good players. Washington needs good players. They got them. It's fine.
Danico Autry and Al-Shaair going to Houston is so perfect because it feels like Houston in recent years has been a breeding ground for like defensive players that are like kind of hipster favorites, and these are two like long-standing hipster favorites. So
can I add one more for you? They just signed Danielle Hunter.
Oh, snap. For how much?
For 2 years, $49 million with 48 guaranteed, which is a very funny.
Wait, 49 million, 40. First
49
of all,
million, 48 guaranteed.
Fascinating for
has
Hunter.
A max value of 51 from.
That's such an odd deal because he's 29, so that means he can hit the market again. Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson Jr., Nico Autry.
Al-Shaair, this is a very fun.
Oh my God!
Defense. Like I think we were going to be positive on these two signings before.
Yes.
I think adding Hunter to this, and now it's kind of like San Francisco, where it's a deeper edge rotation that you can get these guys going. You're never really at a disadvantage along the line. Al-Shaair, I think, just to go in, was so much fun. He was the third linebacker in San Francisco behind Warner and Greenlaw. Went to Tennessee last year on a very cheap 1-year deal and was just amazing. He was all over the place. Stopped the run, was better in coverage than given credit for. I love him going back to D'Amico, kind of being that guy in the Houston defense now.
Houston defense that finished as like the best run defense in the NFL, had a 4-man rush that got better and better, and by the end of the season was outstanding. I love that they are going in. They have the Chupacabra, which is the elite quarterback on a rookie contract. I love that they're not taking that for granted. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and with so much cap space, they're making those types of moves. I remember the Football Outsiders Almanac like 2 years ago. I remember I had the Houston chapter, and it was when they were just like signing guys for 1 year and like $6 million. Like, that's what they built the entire plan out of. And it was like, what are they going toward? But now with all those contracts came off the book this past year, they really are setting themselves up with a core and just kind of these again good players that are coming in. Houston already had one of my favorite off seasons with just like Al-Shaair and Autry, and now adding Hunter to that. This is a fun.
I feel like if you
very fun defense that you can see exactly what they want to do.
Yes. If you survey 10 NFL analysts this offseason, like who's their sneaky Super Bowl pick, 9 will say Houston. It's going to be like Houston and Green Bay head to head. Well, that is very exciting. I'm glad that broke just in time. What a great way to end this incredibly long podcast. What a great guest. Dan Pizzuta. He writes for the 33rd Team. You guys can find him on socials and whatnot at Dan Pizzuta, right? Is your name?
Dan Pizzuta, yeah.
Dan Pizzuta, yeah. 2 Z's. I am Mina Gimes. As always, this show is impeccably produced by Kirsten Sebecki, with Anthony Jimenez and Owen Saylor helping out. Thank you so much, guys. We will be back next week with Dan Orlovsky, and hopefully I'll get to all the many, many, many things that have the NFL that I didn't today because it's been a wild week.